Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. There we are. Normally I'm not this chipper in the morning, but it's thanks to Starbucks. Okay, let's see if I could ask folks to find their way to their seats. We are going to get started here in about 1 minute. We're going to do roll call and then jump right into it. So we're 1 minute away here. No, I grabbed it and put it in my pocket since I just clicked heads.
We don't have them, but I don't know what
Okay, let's go and get started. James, do you want to kick us off?
Well, good morning, everyone. Great to see your shining faces, the energy that you have, the sparkle in the eye, the song in your heart as you sit down today. Most people smiled when I said that. Hey, looking forward to today. We'll begin with roll call in just a moment. I just want to acknowledge that Devin Hall has joined us online, and we know that Devin from his location has had a little bit of weather over the last few days. So Devin, I'm really glad that you could join us today. So we'll get started with the roll call. Alexis Andeman.
Present.
Mike Calicrate.
Present.
Laura DePietro.
Present.
Stephen Gomes. Present. Tina Gunter. Devin Hall. Devin, if you could just unmute.
Present.
Thank you. Tara Heinzen.
Present.
Will Higgins.
Present.
Chris Hoffman.
Present.
Kelly Hunter Foster.
Present.
Becky Yonoskin.
Present.
Keith Lyric. Present. Tom McDonald. Here. Rick Narabout. Kevin Schaefer.
Present.
Marguerite Tam.
Present.
Alicia Vosto.
Here.
Melissa Wilson.
Present.
Kent Woodmansee.
Here.
And our ex officio member, Taryn Hillsman.
Here.
Venus, do we have quorum?
Yes, Chairman, we do. So at this time, I'd like to just again welcome the AAWQ subcommittee members, our meeting attendees, members of the public. Again, Venus Welch-White, the DFO for the AAWQ. Again, we're excited to welcome you to the second day of our 2-day public hybrid meeting. Please note that while this meeting is open to the public, only the sessions and all the sessions are open. Only AAWQ subcommittee members and speakers will be able to ask questions, make comments, collaborate, and otherwise work throughout the meeting. Details about the mission of the subcommittee, the charge topics, as well as the members can be found on our website at www.epa.gov/FACA/FRRCC-0. We'll plan to conclude our meeting today at approximately noon. That's going to be Eastern Standard Time. However, if we complete our agenda items, we may conclude and adjourn early. We will have no public commenters today. Any members of the public that are interested in providing feedback to the committee regarding this meeting can do so via email at aawq@epa.gov. To be consistent with our Federal Advisory Committee guidelines, a meeting summary will be available on our website within 90 days of the meeting. And like always, members of our press who are attending either in person or virtually, if you need any additional information or assistance, please feel free to reach out to our press office at press@epa.gov. Again, that's press, press@epa.gov. And we'll be happy to assist you. At this point, I'll hand it back over to our chair, Dr. James Bridget. Thank you.
Venus, thank you. Appreciate that. So just a note on the agenda today, we'd mentioned this yesterday, but I wanted to make sure that we all have the same understanding. We'll begin with our presentation. We have an expert to speak to us about considerations of manure management in the production area. So looking forward to that. Then we'll begin work on work groups. Really appreciate the comments that you made on the flip charts over in the corner. We had a chance to process that a little bit. You'll also notice that Venus sent PDF documents to you that outline two things. One is an updated version of some of those questions we had for the work groups. And also the other is a cadence of meetings, proposed cadence or tentative cadence, that when we break into our work groups, we'll be able to affirm that for each of our groups. So 2 documents. If you need those documents, let Venus or I know, and we'll make sure that we get those to you. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Stephanie Kaluza, who's Assistant Professor of Nutrient Management and Animal Waste at North Carolina University. Really appreciate your expertise, Stephanie, and joining us online today. We'll go ahead and get started with your presentation once we get that up. And appreciate the expertise that you'll bring us toward manure management in the production area. So Stephanie, thank you. And why don't you go ahead and get started?
Awesome. Just want to confirm you can hear me. Great.
Can hear you well.
Cool.
Thank you.
I can't see you, but if you have questions, feel free to shout out and let me know. Happy to answer any questions as we go through this. And so really just want to talk about some of the common industries that we see in the United States, some of the different types of manure management strategies that they use based on the manure that's produced on in those different industries, and talk about some of the just general ways that they manage those manures in the production system. So to start off, the United States is quite large and quite diverse. And so this is a map of different land use types across the United States. And because of our climate and topography, we see differences in what crops are grown. We see differences in what different livestock or poultry industries have developed in that region. A lot of it's based on climate, and a lot of it's also based on regulations as well. So when we look at where these different industries have really settled across the United States, there are big differences based on the industry that you're talking about. So the first one here that I'm showing is the dairy industry. We see that California, Idaho, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Michigan, a little bit in Texas as well. We see this accumulation of or dense production in small areas. And that's because we're generating milk on a facility 365 days a year. Milk is mostly water, about 97% water. And so we have to get that milk to market every day of the year. Because of that, the distance to processor is very important. And so generally we see this accumulation of farms around processing capacity is a big reason why we see that. But one of the characteristics of the manure generated on these farms is that it's also a wet manure, which we'll talk about a little bit as far as the challenges associated with that. So we have this industry that is densely populated around processing capacity, but also we have this dense accumulation of wet manure that is difficult to transport. And from a logistical standpoint, that can create a challenge for production and management. Hogs and pigs are kind of similar in that we see very dense production in certain areas, again, likely due to processing. North Carolina has the densest production as far as the number of farms in an area, consolidated in an area, but Iowa and Minnesota are currently 1 and 2 in production, but you see that their farms are a little more spread out. And so there's differences not only in the manure management systems that they utilize, which we'll talk about when we talk about swine manure production and handling, but also the density of production is different in these different regions as well, which lends itself to some challenges. Cattle and calves are more widely distributed across the landscape. If you know anything about raising cattle, a lot of them are raised on pasture, at least for a portion of their life. And so they can be raised in a wide diversity of climates, and they can be raised on marginal lands. So we see a very diverse population distributed across the United States because they're more easily produced on marginal lands. Now, poultry, we see the eastern half of the U.S. is where poultry dominates. We see that really it's widely distributed, and we have a lot of production all throughout the eastern half of the United States. And poultry houses, they have a small footprint, and so they can be built in a wide array of situations and areas. And so we see a big diversity in where they're located. They're also ventilated and heated, so the temperature control, the climate aspect, the animals are enclosed or indoors, and you have ventilation and heating, so you can have a wide range of climates where they are suitable to be raised. So we can see we have a real diversity in where animals are being raised. And also we have a diversity in the manures that are generated and how those manures are handled on those farms. So we're gonna go into what these farms look like generally and how manure is handled on those facilities. So we'll start off with poultry. So I'll focus mainly on broiler production, but there are three main categories of production: broiler, turkey, and layers. So those are generally what we look at, but within that you can also have different production systems as well, because you also have to have breeder facilities. But for the sake of today's discussion, I'm going to focus on broilers specifically. So broiler production, the farms generally look very similar. They will change over time. So a house that was built in the 90s is not going to look exactly the same as a house built today. But generally, within a certain time period, houses will look exactly the same. And this is because this is a vertically integrated industry. And so if you're going to contract with an integrator, they might have certain requirements for how their animals are going to be raised. And so because of that vertical integration, they dictate a lot about how the animals are raised, and therefore we see a lot of similarities across the industry because of that. Within these poultry houses, we see that there are feeders and waterers that run down the length of the animal housing. These animals are raised on bedding material, and the feces is mixed with this bedding material over time, and that generates poultry litter. Now, that poultry litter is what is generally managed, and it is managed over time a little bit differently. So throughout time, you'll have, or between flocks, you'll have what's called decaking occur, also called crusting. And this is a piece of equipment that may or may not be used on farms. It's a common piece of equipment, typically referred to as a crust buster. And so what happens is it scoops up the top layer of litter, and all the chunks, all the chunky stuff that's real wet, gets dumped into the back and collected, while the material that's still dry and fluffy will be left behind. And so in between flocks, you can have several flocks in a year, but in between each flock, they typically run through this and go beneath these feeders and waterers where the animals spend the majority of their time, and they remove the manure from underneath there using a piece of equipment like this. And so they'll remove the caked litter or crustings. It's referred to as either one of those, depending on where you are in the country. And that material is then either stockpiled or put into a litter shed until it is land applied. It can also be moved directly to the field if it's a conducive time for land application. Now, periodically, producers will go in and completely clean out everything, and that's called a whole house clean out. That has lengthened over time, in my opinion. It used to be every 1 to 2 years you would do a whole house clean out. Now people are pushing it 3, 4, 5, maybe even up to 5 years of of raising birds before they do a whole house clean out. And a lot of that has to do with the cost of bedding materials getting higher and higher over time, particularly when lumber prices skyrocketed. Bedding material in North Carolina in particular got very expensive because our primary source is sawdust or wood shavings. And so because of that, there was a real spike in the cost of replacing the bedding. And so after a whole house clean out, which includes having skid steers come in and remove all of the litter, they will put in new bedding material and start the process over again. That material is either put into a litter shed, stockpiled either on the edge of the field or maybe somewhere on the facility. It may be covered, it may be left uncovered, depends on state regulations as to whether they're required to cover the material, and then it's land applied. Some people are going directly from cleaning out the house to land application, but the timing has to align perfectly with crop production for that to happen. And so these flocks are going in and out throughout the year. And so you're not guaranteed to have time to clean out the poultry litter when you're going to apply in the spring to corn. And so based on the timing of when you're able to clean out that material, you may have to stage it or stockpile it until land application because of that timing aspect. Now, when we talk about how nutrients move in this system, we've got nutrients coming onto farms and we have nutrients leaving farms. Generally, when we think about manure management in the production area, we can lose a lot of ammonia through the ventilation of the animal housing. Ammonia is high in poultry litter, and so ventilation is required to make sure that you keep a healthy environment for the animals. And so oftentimes you're ventilating to reduce the ammonia levels in the animal housing. However, some people are also using amendments on the litter, such as PLT, to reduce the amount of ammonia in the animal housing. And so this might cut down on the requirement for ventilation early in the life cycle of the animals, which is when it's most critical for their health. But it just depends on the producer and also the integrator. Sometimes the integrator has a company come in and apply the treatment. It just depends on the individual producer and the integrator as to whether they decide to do that or not. And then land application, which I know you talked about already, we can have loss of nitrogen either through ammonia volatilization if it's left on the soil surface, or we can have loss through leaching of nitrogen if it is left and there's excessive rainfall. It can leach through our soils. Runoff is usually a minor loss mechanism for nitrogen, but it is the primary mechanism of loss for phosphorus. And so phosphorus, because it doesn't have a volatile component, because it typically doesn't leach, its primary loss mechanism is through runoff. Now, the characteristics of these materials, poultry litter is dry, which means that is very advantageous for this industry. We talked about whole house versus caked litter. There are differences in the nutrient content because of the way it is cleaned out. Caked litter is typically has more moisture, but also has higher nutrient content because there's less bedding diluting that material. And so caked litter generally has higher nutrient content because of that. There are significant differences between those production types that we talked about. Like I said, broiler production is what we're specifically talking about today, but there are differences in turkey and layer as well. And a lot of that has to do with their different species. And so they're generating different amounts of manure. They're also being fed different diets. Layers are raised on a slatted floor versus on bedding. And so there's no dilution of layer manure with bedding material. Therefore, layer manure is generally higher in nutrients as well. Because of the high nutrient content and the fact that it's dry, this is typically the most widely marketed manure source. If you talk about manure marketplaces and the ability logistically to move manure, poultry litter is probably number one because it has higher value because it's got high nutrient content as well as low moisture, and therefore logistically it's easier to transport. It has its challenges, but in general, it is seen as the most valuable source of manure produced. So now we're going to move on to swine production. I'm in North Carolina. Melissa Wilson is in Minnesota, so we have a bit of a experience or expertise on both of the typical manure management systems in the room. I know mostly about North Carolina, so I'm hoping that Melissa can provide some context for Minnesota and Iowa manure production systems. If I get anything wrong, make sure you call me out, Melissa. Hogs are raised on a slatted floor, and that manure in North Carolina goes to an anaerobic treatment lagoon. Now, this right off the bat is a wet manure system, which is challenging from a logistical standpoint because there's a lot of water. You see that it is open to the atmosphere, so you can have some rainfall diluting the manure. And the water is recycled and flushes out the bottom of these houses. So the slatted floor allow the urine and feces to fall through the slats. It's a shallow pit underneath each one of these houses, and then water is pumped into the top and flushes out the manure into the anaerobic treatment lagoon. Now you'll notice I say anaerobic treatment lagoon. This is a very important distinction between any other reception pit or other lagoon that you might see. You'll notice that there's a pink hue to this anaerobic treatment lagoon, and that's because it's a highly functioning lagoon. These anaerobic treatment lagoons act as anaerobic digesters and are very good at decomposing and breaking down that manure that's entering into the system. Now, that material, you have basically 3 layers within a lagoon. You have the sludge layer that accumulates at the bottom. You have a treatment layer, which is actively decomposing any of the incoming manure into the system. And then you have this top water on the top that is the lagoon effluent that is then land applied to the field annually. Now, this is an important distinction between the Southeast and the Midwest. Anaerobic treatment lagoons, they're not being emptied every year. In fact, it would be bad if they were emptied every year because they need that treatment zone to maintain their effectiveness. So if you accidentally kill the treatment bacteria in your lagoon, you can actually shut down those bacteria, and then you'd have this really fast accumulation of solids, which would increase odors, would reduce your ability to store manure. There's all sorts of bad things that could happen if you accidentally kill the lagoon system. But when annually they're pumping effluent, they're just pumping the top water off, and that is generally going to Bermuda grass hay with a rye overseed. And so that hay land is not producing feed that then comes back onto the farm. So that manure is being used to raise or to grow hay that is then being marketed elsewhere. So there, it's not very circular as far as feed coming back onto the farm. When that sludge is cleaned out, that also has to be land applied. It is still very wet. We're talking about 10 to 15% solids usually. So it's still a very, very wet material, which has a lot of logistical challenges because you're moving so much water. So the distance of transport can be very challenging from that perspective. As far as unique things that are going on in North Carolina, there's a big push in North Carolina for anaerobic digesters. Smithfield has said they're going to put 90% of their finishing population under anaerobic digestion in the near future. That doesn't take away the lagoon, but the lagoon isn't acting as an anaerobic treatment lagoon anymore. It's more acting as a storage pond for land application after the material is digested. So you still have a pond on the farm to hold the digestate, but you have anaerobic digesters that are then capturing methane for renewable energy production. So North Carolina is advantageous for the industry here because we have renewable energy credits. that are available for the use of manure as a renewable energy source. And so that has been I think, a big push for getting these digesters in North Carolina on these hog farms. Another thing that we're seeing is the addition of sludge drying capacity in North Carolina. So like I said, that sludge is really wet. It's not cleaned out every year. It's cleaned out maybe every 20 years or so. And so when that material is removed, there are greenhouse dryers that are being installed to dry that material and create a dry product. Because remember, I said poultry litter is most widely marketed because it's dry and has a lot of nutrients in it. Well, this sludge has a lot of nutrients in it, but it's wet. So there's a real effort to dry that material and then be able to transport it farther from the farm. Now, that's not currently widely going on. It just started probably about 3 or 4 years ago being implemented on some farms. And so I envision that we'll see that on farms much more often in the future. Like I said, that material is being sprayed on typically Bermuda grass hay, and then that hay is being fed usually to beef cattle. In the Midwest, we still have slatted floors, but we have what's called a deep pit system. And so the manure is cleaned out annually in a deep pit system, and you have this agitation, and then you suck out the material into tankers and take it directly to the field. So still a wet manure system, but you don't have that rainfall diluting the nutrients. So the manure in the Midwest is likely to be higher or more highly concentrated in nutrients because you don't have that dilution by rainfall. And so it's a bit different in its constituents, and as well as the farms being farther apart, it's typically easier to manage the amount of manure that's being generated and get it to farm fields in the surrounding area. Now, on these swine farms, again, we have nutrients coming in, nutrients coming out. We've got feed coming in that's generally provided from the integrator in both poultry and swine. We've got manure that moves from the animal housing to any treatment or any lagoon system. We have land application of the effluent onto those fields of Bermuda grass hay. And that feed is not coming back onto the farm. So that feed is being exported off-site to be sold as Bermuda grass hay. Meat is also marketed, and so that meat and any hay that's going off farm are the nutrients that are leaving that farm. We can have losses of nitrogen, just like in poultry from the animal housing. We can also have it from any manure storage areas. We can have ammonia volatilization or leaching in the land application areas. Again, nitrogen loss through runoff is a very minor component, but it is the only component for phosphorus loss. So some common characteristics: swine manure, again, is wet. It can be in the sludge and effluent phases in North Carolina, or just as a one phase, a liquid manure in the Midwest. It is heavily digested in these anaerobic treatment lagoons. It has a lot of phosphorus in that sludge and can be high in zinc. So depending on the phase of production, the diet of these animals changes, which creates great variability in the manure that's generated on these farms. Nursery farms in particular have high levels of zinc fed to them as an antimicrobial and growth promoter. And so you can see especially high levels of zinc in nursery farm lagoons. This has caused toxicity issues to crops when it's land applied at too high of rates. So often nursery sludge, you're limiting your application not on nitrogen or phosphorus, but on zinc, because it's got such high levels of zinc. And so that's an issue that can pop up depending on the life stage of the production facility. As far as dairy farms, this is not a vertically integrated system or industry. And so we see a lot of diversity on dairy farms because of that. Dairies might be members of co-ops that may have agreements to do certain practices on their farms for a premium. But in general, every farm's doing what they think is best for their farm, and nobody's telling them otherwise because they own everything. They own the cows, they own the land, they own the facilities, and they're selling their milk into usually a co-op, but could be direct as well. Generally, we'll see lagoons on these farms, but they're not anaerobic treatment lagoons. These are aerobic lagoons, and so they're more like a holding pond until land application. These farms are generally generating at least some of the feed that they're utilizing on the farm. Feed is the #1 cost of a dairyman. And so if they can get low cost feed, generally that is seen as advantageous. However, it can cause some issues when it comes to nutrient management and manure management because some of these feeds are very high in phosphorus. So one example is distillers grains. And so we can see high phosphorus in the manure if we're feeding distillers grains because it has very high phosphorus in it. And so there's a wide range of feeds that are utilized depending on where you are in the United States. And also there's a variety of housing types and manure management based on where you are in the United States. So when I was in Idaho, because it's in a desert, you can see open lot dairies versus in North Carolina, we get a lot of rainfall. And so I haven't seen a single open lot dairy in North Carolina. And so your animal housing is really going to be dependent on the climate of the area. And your manure management is going to be dependent on that as well. You can see deep pits that are concrete reception pits, or you can see lagoons. It just depends on where you are in the country as to and how big the farm is as to what kind of management system you see. And dairy manure is a little unique in that we often see multi-stage treatment on dairy farms, which means that we might have a mechanical separator removing solids. We might have an advanced separator. And then it goes on to settling cells that can be earthen or concrete. And then it goes to the lagoon. So you can have multi-stage systems on these dairy farms. And it's very common to see multiple treatment technologies on these farms. Now, when you talk about removing solids from these liquid manure streams, solids equal phosphorus. So a lot of times solids reduction is really focused on removing phosphorus from this liquid stream. However, then we have a liquid stream and a solid stream, which requires us to have equipment to manage both of those as well. So we can't use the same truck to spread liquid effluent as we use to spread solid effluent. Those are two different pieces of equipment. So adding some of these technologies isn't just about investing in the technology. Sometimes it's also investing in labor as well as new machinery to actually handle the additional stream that's being produced on these farms. And so on dairy farms, again, we have nutrients coming in and nutrients coming out. By far, the majority of nutrients coming onto the farm are through the feed that's being fed to the animals. That manure is generated, and we might have, again, several stages of manure treatment or processing in between the animal housing and the lagoon. In this instance, we only have one. Land application, and then the feed is coming back onto the farm. So we do have a little bit of circularity there, but because we're bringing on feed, we're always bringing in nutrients. So there's an imbalance there in the circularity of nutrients on the farm. And then the only thing really leaving is the milk. And so our nutrients leaving the farm are generally lower than the nutrients coming onto the farm. From a nitrogen loss perspective, you can lose nitrogen from the animal housing, from any of the manure treatment technologies, from the lagoon, and then from the land application sites through ammonia volatilization or nitrate leaching. Again, nitrogen loss through runoff is the minor component, and nitrogen loss through or phosphorus loss is generally through erosion alone. Dairy manure is often handled as a wet product, but you can have removal of solids and composting of that, or management of the solids as a dry product. It's typically used on acreage to grow feed, and there's lots of variation on farms, and so there's a lot of difference in the manure characteristics. Again, cattle production is a little different, especially from a pasture cow-calf perspective. You don't have this centralized manure management when you're talking about a pasture system. However, feedlots can be somewhat correlated to the manure management of dairy farms. However, dairy is producing a food product on site that's being sent to market. So because of the pasteurized milk ordinance, there's a lot of cleaning on dairy farms. So there's a lot more water to handle on dairy farms because of that, because there's a lot of cleaning. And so dairy manure, the lagoons generally are much bigger, because on beef farms, you're only worried about runoff from the animal housing itself and any manure management. Versus dairy, you're having to include all of that wash water that's happening daily as well. And so in the pasture system, you might be supplementing a little bit with feed or fertilizing your pasture, but in general, there's a lot of circularity there. Manure is being directly applied. Now, if you've ever seen a pasture, you know that it's not evenly dispersed in the pasture, the manure. Generally, if you have a tree that's offering some shade, the animals really love to hang out there. If you have a source of water or feed, the animals really like to hang out there. And so you can have some imbalances in nutrient deposition because of that. And so you do have a good circularity here, but it can be uneven depending on the characteristics of the individual pasture. So you can have some nutrient loss. A lot of this depends on your stocking rate and the quality of your pasture, as far as whether you'll see nutrient losses, any significant nutrient losses. And again, phosphorus losses is going to be over the land. There's a lot of technology that I've pointed out today, and some of these are more effective than others. Some are more costly than others, and I've seen all of these in person. So we've got some that are, lower bar that maybe are less effective, but are also much more cost effective to implement. One of those is the slope screen separator. You find these on a lot of dairies. They're not super expensive, but they're also not the most effective at phosphorus removal. That would probably be this one, which is the centrifuge separator. But these cost like $250,000 to put on a farm. So there's a certain level of farming and investment that you have to really implement this level of technology on a farm. And we have anaerobic digestion. That is a manure management technology, but from a nutrient management perspective, it doesn't really help the producer. In fact, producers in North Carolina might need more land because they're capturing more nitrogen. And so while this is a renewable energy resource and technology, it generally is not helping in the number one concern of farmers, which is the nutrient management aspect. And so implementation of anaerobic digestion often is touted as, being the thing that everybody should do. But when it comes to nutrient management or manure management, the real thing that a lot of producers are facing is the imbalance between nitrogen and phosphorus in manures, not necessarily capturing the greenhouse gases associated with the digestion of these materials. And so there are a lot of benefits to anaerobic digestion, and there are technologies that can be added after anaerobic digestion, but anaerobic digestion is not really a nutrient management technology. It is a renewable energy technology. And so based on what technologies are utilized on the farm, it really changes how you have to manage that material. And again, you have to have the equipment to manage a different material if you install something that, say, separates solids from liquids. So we need to know a lot of things to make good application recommendations. We need to know what crops we're growing, what the expected yields of those crops are, the nutrient content of the manure that we're generating on the farm, which varies from farm to farm. We need to know the nutrient availability of those materials, as well as what's in our soils. And then we also need the equipment to make it happen. And so again, this is probably the number one challenge of manure management that producers face. So here we have an example of broiler litter. We've got total nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and you can see the range is really large as far as what you might see in poultry litter. So we've got that variability, but we're just going to use the average here. So we've got a average of 58 pounds of nitrogen, 40 pounds of phosphorus, 49 pounds of potassium. If we look at available nutrients, only half of the nitrogen is going to be available, but all of the phosphorus and all the potassium are going to be available. So if we're growing 150 bushel acre corn, which needs 135 pounds of nitrogen and 66 pounds of phosphorus, we see that that ratio is a 2-to-1. We need 2 pounds of nitrogen for every pound of phosphorus. But when we look at what's available in our average manure, we see it's about a 1.5 to 2. And so right off the bat, we see that these two numbers are not balanced. And this is the real pinch point for a lot of producers, is that they're applying to try to meet the nitrogen needs of the crop, because that's the number one cost to them in crop production is the nitrogen. But the phosphorus is out of balance. And so if I'm applying on a nitrogen-based rate, I'm applying 5 tons per acre. And so that means that I'm applying 200 pounds of phosphorus instead of 66 pounds that I needed. And so I'm applying 3 years worth of phosphorus every time I'm applying at a nitrogen-based rate for corn. And so this is where you see the phosphorus accumulation happen on farms, is because we have this imbalance. And there's been a lot of efforts from feed formulation to manure treatment technologies to try to remove the phosphorus or limit the amount of phosphorus that's in the manure. And there have been a lot of great strides towards that, but this is still the number one challenge I would say that producers face on the farm. And so that's really all I had. Manures definitely have value. A lot of it is about getting it to where it's needed and getting it in a form that's able to get there effectively. So the logistics and the manure nutrients are really the challenging points from a manure management standpoint. So happy to take any questions. Sorry, I know I went a little longer than 30 minutes.
Great, Stephanie, thank you. We definitely have some time for questions. I'm going to see, actually first, Melissa, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add with regard to the experience from Minnesota, Iowa. And then I'll flip up your name counts if you have questions.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can.
Great. Yeah, I would pretty much echo everything Stephanie said. Some of the imbalances of the phosphorus and nitrogen are challenges in Minnesota. One of our main focuses is actually nitrogen and less on the phosphorus, just because of the issues we're having with the Gulf of Mexico. That's a nitrogen issue rather than phosphorus. So it just reiterates kind of what we've been talking about, that every state or region kind of has different issues that they're focusing on. But otherwise, yeah, I'd agree pretty much with everything Stephanie said.
Great, thank you, Melissa. So do folks have questions? Any reflections on what Stephanie reviewed there?
Quite proud.
Yeah, Will?
Yeah, Stephanie, you touched really briefly, I think, on, some nutrient separation technology. I guess, maybe if you could comment on what you're seeing and, what you're seeing is how prevalent that is becoming, or, producers' ability to do that, or what hurdles you see that people are facing in trying to implement those type of technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go back to that slide because there's a lot of different ones on there. So I worked for the Idaho Dairymen's Association for a few years. And I saw every one of these technologies on farms except for this anaerobic treatment lagoon. That was new to me, seeing a pink lagoon when I first got to North Carolina. And so implementation on dairy farms, I would say, is very common. There's a lot of fiber in dairy manure. And so some level of solids removal is done on dairy farms that on almost every dairy farm that I've visited. There's some sort of solids removal being conducted. Now that could be just having a slope screen separator going directly to the lagoon, or it could be having a series of settling ponds that you go in and you clean out with a skid steer every few days. And so the level of technology is going to be based on the goals of the producer and what they perceive as the ROI, the return on investment. I've seen a lot of investment in technologies for phosphorus removal in Idaho in particular in my time there, because I was visiting a lot of farms. And so I think that it depends on the goals of the producer as well as their financial situation as to whether it's being implemented on the farm. But I see a lot of dairymen investing in technologies on the farm. From a swine manure management standpoint, the anaerobic treatment lagoon doesn't really lend itself to having those technologies because it's digesting those solids and you have this solids accumulation on the bottom. So the drying facility is really what I see as a major investment in technology on those farms, if they end up going that way for sludge management. I see that as a huge potential and offering huge benefits for farmers because it allows them to continuously manage the sludge levels in their lagoons instead of investing tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to completely clean out the sludge once. They're able to invest maybe $100,000 in a greenhouse with a concrete floor, basically, is what it comes down to continuously pump that sludge into an area to be dried. This allows them not to be stressed come time for monitoring the levels of their sludge because they know they're continuously managing that. And so I see that as a huge opportunity in the swine industry. From the poultry industry perspective, the only phosphorus treatment that I see there is maybe the addition of alum, which reduces the availability of phosphorus. That has been shown to provide some water quality benefits, but it doesn't actually target the total phosphorus in the material. And so there's some challenges from a poultry litter standpoint because there's not really that ability to remove the phosphorus. And so a lot of the phosphorus removal is focused in these wet manure systems because those solids, when you remove them, are reducing the phosphorus level. And so that's where we see a lot of implementation of technologies is basically in swine and dairy to try to target those. I hope I answered your question.
Yep, thank you.
Great, thank you, Will. Thank you, Stephanie. Other questions?
I'll do one.
Becky, please.
Hi, Stephanie. I'm with Indiana Poultry.
Mhm.
And we have our two largest egg integrators in the state. Both have facilities where they collect all of their layer manure, or most of it, and process it and I think remove some constituents from it and then are able to send it much farther than even they're normally able to. I'm not sure if that's something that goes on in North Carolina, or if you're familiar with that. I would say the one company, they've been doing that for a while. It's pretty well established, and the other one's just ready to come online. But significant volumes of layer manure.
Yeah, layer manure is a little bit different. Sorry, I hear a reverb. There we go. So layer manure is different from that perspective because it's consolidated in nutrients and because they typically use a conveyor belt system to move the manure out. We do see that some layers will invest in the pelletization of their material and sell it as an organic fertilizer. So you're absolutely right there. I definitely missed that one. But that is a technology that is being utilized on some layer facilities. That's mostly layer facilities that I'm aware of that do that. And we're not a big layer state. We have we have one very big layer facility. But and actually that's this one right here. They're composting their material and it's being spread throughout the region in the northeastern part of the state. There's a big market for their manure. And so I don't think that at this time they have to worry about getting it land applied. If they were constrained due to either regulations or due to restrictions on land application, or an industry maybe moving in and producing more manure in that region, then maybe they would find it advantageous to invest in that kind of processing and upscaling of their manure. But at this time, they're able to compost their material and then land apply it in the region. But thank you for that comment. That is definitely a good point.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, maybe a time for one more question if there's one more question. Okay, James, I think we're ready to move on. Any final thoughts?
Just want to thank you, Dr. Kluza, for sharing your expertise with us. Great to be able to see a national perspective on where animal agriculture is taking place and then the diversity of systems that are there. And I appreciate you dividing it by species for us. That's the kind of information that's really useful with this varied and diverse group that we have here. So thank you, Dr. Kluza.
Anytime. Thanks for the invite.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I've been doing my job for 23 years, and this is what I've learned. I've learned that many of you have been away from your houses for 5 or 6 days. All of us have been sleeping in a bed that's not our bed for at least 3 days. We've had long days. You've been doing this job and your other job, and it's Friday, and you guys are worried about flight cancellations. And here we are with 2 hours left, and we're talking about process. I bet you guys are super, super excited about this, right? Right? Okay, so I recognize all of that, but how many of you have to sign paychecks or do invoicing? Stuff that keeps things going, that's super, super important, right? You have to sign the paychecks or your colleagues don't get paid. You have to do your invoices or you can't pay your bills or you can't do things. That's the place that we're at. We have to do this work. And I know you all are tired, and I'm asking you all to dig in. And I promise you that after this conversation, if we can land this, this is the last sort of painful process conversation that we're going to have for a while. Okay? Y'all are with me? Can you guys make eye contact with me? All right. James, Venus, any after that rousing little TED talk, anything that you want to say before we move into this conversation?
Just jump on in, Rob.
Okay. All right. So here's how I want to have this conversation. So at the end of the day yesterday, I invited you all to go up to the board there and add your comments. And I also invited you all to spend some time ruminating, thinking about what we rolled out yesterday. So the way I want to start this is I just want you all, if you're willing to share where you're at with this. I know that I've done that and I've got an opinion. I've looked at the documents through somewhat fresh eyes. And then I've looked at that and it feels to me as if there is a path here. But I'm not the one that has to do all of the work. And so I'm really interested on where you all are at this morning and what you're thinking. Marguerite?
Yeah, a question that I had is the document that you sent out last night or this morning, I'm not sure when it was. The only change that I saw on that document versus what you provided us in paper in person, which is where that collaboration and partnerships was located. Were there any other additions or substantive changes to that document?
No, and again, that's a draft. So part of what that, I think there was a few tiny little edits, but based off of the conversation yesterday, I think it was decided that the collaboration and partnership needed to be included in all of those pieces. So that was moved up to the top to make sure that those are things that are captured and considered in each one. But again, I'll say that this is still draft and they're not locked in. There can be additions and subtractions and considerations and lines and squiggles. This is an iterative process.
Thank you, Marguerite. Thank you, Venus. So where are folks at? How, as you're thinking about this through, again, quasi fresh eyes, how are you feeling? Where are you at? Yeah, Laura?
I was surprised to see the schedule and, originally yesterday it was 4 months was the discussion and this goes through almost to the end with the ad hoc work group. So I was just curious what that process was about.
That was an initial draft kind of based off, so this is not, I would say, it goes to the end, but not necessarily with these ad hoc work groups. We'll do a second iteration of ad hoc work groups. So we're really trying to work on getting this body of work and this exploration to occur between now and our next public meeting, which we're hoping is after the beginning of the year. But it just kind of an outlay of what's to come. And again, it's a draft. It's not anything that's final. It's our proposed schedule could change depending on what the needs are, where the subcommittee needs to go. If we need to have another public meeting prior to, we have that ability. But again, just to kind of outlay that we're looking at about 2 ad hoc work group meetings per month. So a cadence of maybe every other week, depending on kind of timing and holidays and some of those things. But just to give people an idea, how often will you all be meeting and how much time do you have between now and the preparation for the next public meeting?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Venus. Other thoughts? Yeah, Mike.
Since nobody's saying anything. I look at the working groups, the ad hoc working groups, and I just kind of want to add another group. I come from livestock production, but also in the last 24 years, I've had a lot to do with USDA's Food Safety Inspection Service and HACCP. What's that stand for? How many of you know what HACCP stands for? Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. It's an acronym, right? And so when I come to this gathering, we've got all these new acronyms and I'm writing them down and I'm looking them up and it's difficult. But the point I'm making is it seems like in our government that we look to acronyms to solve our problems. And I'm troubled by that because HACCP hasn't worked. That's pretty, a bold statement, right? But I guarantee it has not worked. It has allowed big packers to get bigger and small packers to have a lot more paperwork. And paper is not an intervention for pathogens. And so what you've done with HACCP is you've taken a productive kill floor employee that's good with a knife and you've handed him a laptop and he's not very happy and he should be on the kill floor and practicing sanitary slaughter practices. And so I see this whole acronym thing and I just, during COVID, we really got a test of our food system and it failed. And the models of food production that we're looking at here in this committee is that same industrial model that failed during COVID. How many birds did we euthanize, foam? How many pigs did we bury in the ground that we couldn't slaughter? And you're shaking your head, Rebecca, but it was millions of them that we euthanized and buried. And the system didn't, how many grocery shelves were empty? But in my system that I built because I didn't like the other one 24 years ago, we never had an empty shelf because our supply chain is dependable, it's resilient, and we just went to work and produced more. Retail sales increased 300% during COVID, and we met that demand with no help from the government. I called the Food Safety Inspection Service administrator and I said, we're just being hammered. Can we get a couple extra hours a day to operate? And this is in processing where you don't always have an inspector there. They come and go. can we just get a couple more hours a day to produce and give our guys a little bit of a rest and maybe something to eat? It took them 5 minutes to answer the question by email, and it was a 2-letter answer, NO, no. What the heck? Why not? And so basically we got through it, but we've proven a food system that can be resilient, environmentally clean and friendly. And what we're doing is we're tweaking the big industrial food system that failed. And I just don't want to have to do that. I've got some ideas that could help on land application and, manure management and some things like that. But overall, I'd rather focus on, if I want clean water, if I want livable communities, I want to look back 50 years at an agriculture with lots of family farms, with lots of individual family farms producing pigs again on pasture, like Greg Gunthorpe does in Indiana, like Will Harris does in Georgia. These are examples of an alternative food system that serves us very, very well from an environmental perspective, a clean water, a healthy soil perspective. And yet all we're doing is looking at industrial systems and how we're going to tweak them and subsidize them, and ignoring the fact that those farmers, those people on the land that own those chicken houses and those hog houses that don't own the livestock are not making enough money to be good stewards. And maybe the answer comes to us from the Federal Trade Commission. Maybe we get some help from the Justice Department, and we start breaking up this concentrated power that's enslaving us and not allowing us to be good stewards. And, my point is I don't want to mess with the fuel mixture. I don't care about the diesel exhaust fluid. I want to pull the engine. I want to pull the engine out and put a new one in. And I want to redesign a food system that's safe, that's healthy, that rebuilds rural communities and that protects our water. Go to Guyman, Oklahoma. When that water runs out, seaboard's gone. Go to Colorado. When that water runs out, Cargill and JBS are gone. When that water runs out at St. Francis, Kansas, the McCartys are gone that sell the biggest contractor to Danone. They are gone. But what's left in our community when the water's gone? And I want to see more grass. I want to see more livestock-centered farming operations where we don't spray Roundup everywhere or dicamba everywhere and destroy the environment. This is happening in St. Francis, Kansas, where I live. Dead trees everywhere. I can't even have a decent pasture mix because of the drifts off in the farm fields all around me. We've got one farmer in Goodland, Kansas, farming 30,000 acres with a spray rig and a no-till planter. That is not a sustainable system. So I want to get back to building the local regional food system that this government said they wanted after COVID, but then never supported. Never supported. Why in the world can't they buy from these local regional plants that we subsidized and we gave grant money to and we built? Why can't this government buy from them instead of JBS? Well, Secretary Vilsack said, because they're big, because JBS is big, we have to buy from them. Well, to contact the owners, for a long time, you had to, contact the prison in Brazil. And this is who we're going to deal with. And I'm just saying, policy has to change at the top to support the kind of food system we want. And I think we're wasting a lot of time thinking we're going to fix it with a bunch of acronyms and not address the fundamental problem of a highly concentrated food system that only serves corporate profits and not people. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Other thoughts that folks have? Okay, so Venus and James, what I'd like to do, if you're comfortable with it, can I just share with you all kind of my reflections as the process manager of kind of what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, just maybe as a straw person. So when I woke up this morning, came downstairs and started looking at those boards, there were three things that popped out at me. The first is that there were items on each of those boards that that are clear gaps that you all identified that could be added to each of the areas. So for number one, the one that we have entitled nutrient management plans, there are a couple of items on there having to do with inclusion of technology and accommodating that within the question. There was one very specific question about clarity about a definition within a I can't remember whether it's a law or a regulation, and some notion of flexibility. And it felt as if folks were comfortable with those additions, that the folks that are in those groups could take those suggestions and formulate questions around them. When I looked at the second one, there was several suggestions having to do with more specificity with regard to monitoring. How does monitoring and monitoring regimes fit within the context of manure management systems? I also saw on the second board there, lagoon liners several times showed up, so the addition of lagoon. There were a couple of things on number two that you all wrote down that I felt were more appropriate under number one, specifically having to do with phosphorus. I can't remember what it was. Phosphorus. The first bullet under there. Phosphorus index felt more appropriate for number one. So my proposal would be that, that gap be handled under number one. Under number three, there were several suggestions having to do with specificity around reg reform, and then one on state equivalency. And those felt like gaps that could be handled under number three. Folks look at that are in that group and, come up with questions. There were a couple of places where you all had comments yesterday, specifically under number two, and you all came up to me afterwards having the question about some of the questions around land application don't make sense under number two. And what I would propose is that for the land application one, that both groups, group number one and group number two, take a look at those land application questions and decide whether or not those are appropriate in those sessions, in those groups. So what I'm proposing is that that the document, as was distributed this morning, hold, and that the groups, as we lay them out, take into consideration what are the gaps and suggestions that are in there, and that during the first and second meetings of the groups, you all look at the topics, refine the questions, identify the ones that you're interested in answering, and you begin work based on what the affinity is of the folks that are in those groups. With respect to the thoughts, Mike, that you shared and others shared, I'd like to have an open conversation with this group of, what process do you all want to use for topics that are of interest that may not fall into one of these areas? How is it that you all want to handle that? Do you want to keep a running list going? Do you want to allow members like Mike or others to begin the process of teeing up topics? Like, how is it that you all want to handle some of that? And we do that in conjunction with some of the work that we know that we have already identified that are topics for folks. So that's what I'm thinking. I don't know, James or Venus, if you have any thoughts that you want to share, and then Kent, I see that your name tent went up. I go to Kent or yeah, Kent.
I think if we're doing something different, we need to see how that fits into our charge. And some of these things will not fit under our charge.
Can you be more specific?
I think we just have to look at our charge and these items and see, does it fit under the charge or not fit under the charge? If it doesn't fit under the charge, I don't think we should be spending time on it. We have enough other things under the charge to work on.
Thank you. Yeah, Keith.
I think I generally kind of am on board with what you laid out. looking at the three groups, I mean, number one and number two seem to be more the nuts and bolts of farm planning, running the farm, kind of in accordance with the rules and regs. And then number three seems to be more kind of the more programmatic policy type discussion. I mean,
Yeah.
So and then kind of the stuff that was added to the boards, I think kind of lends itself to that as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know I didn't speak up at first, but kind of having had a chance to sit down and look at it and kind of mull it over. I think it's generally moving in the right direction. And then, I mean, you talked about like both groups working on land application stuff. Like Marguerite said yesterday, I think there will be some overlap, right? There's no avoiding that.
Mhm.
And I think we should just embrace that. And if a group wants to touch on a topic, again, that, like Kent said, that's under the charge, I think generally that should be fair game.
Thank you, Keith. Okay, other thoughts? We're signing paychecks here, people. Yeah. Chris?
Well, luckily I signed the paychecks before I left. So hopefully my workers are not flooded out and they got their paycheck and are taking care of the pigs right now. But I'd like to, kind of just weigh in a little bit. I looked through this, all three segments and again, I'm kind of with Keith, and I think we're going in the right direction here with trying to figure out. One of the things that I was really pondering and considering this morning is I think each committee or ad hoc committee, right, is going to have to really take a look at, like, what is our charge, right? What is underneath the EPA authority, right? And then where does the state, the local communities, the farmers, where does that all work? And I think as we go through this, right, we'll figure it out as we get moving. I'm one of the type of guys that I like to take a big broad look at it and then kind of eliminate things as you go, right? So that doesn't count, or that's not our authority, or where do we sit in this thing? So I think we're in a great place to move forward in getting these ad hoc committees set up, and then let's just see where it leads us and see where those items that we can agree on, where we can find common ground to be able to send to the committee for their consideration. So I think we got a good plan moving forward.
Chris, thank you. Other thoughts that folks want to share? Yeah, Tara.
I just really want to encourage the meeting planners to make sure that we spend more time actually talking about and getting on the same page about the problem, because we've spent almost no time actually understanding and learning about not just water monitoring, water pollution, how CAFOs work, but CAFO water pollution, where it is, how it's affecting people, how it's affecting public health and the environment. So I'd really like to see some presentations from public health experts, environmental justice experts, impacted communities, so that we can really ground ourselves in the problems we're trying to solve.
Thank you, Tara. Other thoughts? My kids hate it when I'm sitting in silence and I'm just looking at them. Yeah, Alicia.
Yeah, I'm just, kind of reflecting on what Mike said and, thinking about the charge of this committee and kind of our purview and, just thinking about, our focus is supposed to be animal agriculture and water quality. And I think that you know, it's a lot of the discussions we've had, we've talked about things that are outside of EPA's purview. You know, we're talking about USDA programs and NRCS and different kinds of private-public partnerships and things like that. And so I think that if we're willing to do that and spend a lot of time focused on that, why can't we also make recommendations about how EPA can support smaller operators, more local food systems, things that are outside of the industrial model? I think that, you know, ultimately that would help support the goals of water quality protection and improvement. And so I think that we should be willing to have some of those conversations as well.
Alicia, thank you. Venus?
Definitely appreciate the comment. Just want, and Taryn, feel free to hop in. Just want to make sure that, part of how our process and what we're doing and what this looks like is really understanding the dynamics of specifically how USD and other programs actually are really supporting what that looks like with the boots on the ground. Often they're the ones that are doing some of the nutrient management plans, and they're doing some of the monitoring. So while I appreciate that statement, I want to make sure that we're clear that it's not just about let's focus on USDA programs or let's talk about USDA, but let's talk about this in the context of how those programs and how those mechanisms are impacting producers, water quality, manure management, the development of the nutrient management program plans. So I just want to make sure that that's a clear connection. We're not kind of talking about an auxiliary. But I definitely appreciate the fact that I'd like the subcommittee to make sure that you all are thinking through these other parts and pieces. You're all allowed to make recommendations about anything you'd like to. I mean, ultimately, it's up to you for y'all to figure out exactly what that looks like and how potentially to solve those challenges, issues, concerns that have been raised, and obviously follow the charge. But just recognizing the standpoint that where the authorities are, that anything that we've got the ability to implement things that are within our authority that governed by the Clean Water Act and kind of where EPA's purview is, and things outside of that. Not that you can't make recommendations, but those are going to be very, very hard to implement because we don't have jurisdictional authority over some of those items. So as we're kind of going through this process, making sure that we're clear on where those lines of delineation are, but appreciate the comment.
Just as a quick response, you know, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think also, you know, having conversations about, you know, yeah, USDA is working with farmers on these specific things. But also talking about the impacts of integrators and kind of this industrial model on the decisions that farmers can make and, you know, within kind of their economic bounds and things like that. I think that is extremely relevant to the conversation, and just want to make sure that, you know, we can have those conversations and try to provide recommendations for how EPA can help support farmers who are trying to find an alternative model and provide clean water and things like that.
And thank you. We welcome that. Definitely look forward to that discussion and conversation. We'll do anything that we can to facilitate that information and that dialogue.
Yeah, Mike.
In Venus, it might come down to something as simple as making it a lot harder for the industrial model to function, make it far more expensive, while allowing space for the better, cleaner, environmentally friendly and community building model to grow. Right now, the opposite has been true. The foot has been on the neck of the rural community and the independent producer, and we have been encouraging, subsidizing the industrial model. So it could be something that simple as we just make it harder to do the wrong thing and easier to do the right thing.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Venus. So what I want to do is I want to be clear about what I think your all's next conversation is going to look like, just so you know what you're signing up for, which seems like it's fair. So with the end in mind, what I'm hoping happens when we adjourn this meeting is that we've got a sense of who is going to be tackling what conversation. Okay, so that's the thing I want to, that's my floor in terms of what I want to accomplish today. The conversations that I think you all are going to have in meeting one and meeting two of your ad hoc work group. Meeting one is going to be, what did we hear from the group? Here are the questions that we came in with. Here are some of the additions that we think we need to make. Here are some potential, some of the subtractions that we want to have. That's meeting number one. Meeting number two of the group is going to be, okay, of the 7 or 8 or 9 of us, no more than 10, that are a part of this ad hoc work group, where are the places that we want to first dig into? Where are the places that we first want to dig into, and what information do we need to be able to dig into it? So it's going to be somewhat of a prioritization exercise. And then you all are going to be off and running, talking about these topics. So meeting number one is the storming and norming part of it is going to be what is it that we heard? How is it that we want to change? Second conversation is what are these topics that we really want to dig into and talk about? So it's going to be meeting number one and meeting number two of your subgroups, ad hoc groups, and then meeting number three is going to be starting to do that hard work. So at the end of the day today, I want to know who's going to be working on which topics, and then the work is going to be beginning to process and iterate this document, and then process and iterate your topics, and then getting into it. So that's what I think the work looks like. I don't know, James, if you've got a different conception of what that looks like.
Rob, that's spot on. I think the second meeting is also a great meeting to be able to discuss what do we need to know and what information, what can we request that can be provided to us.
Okay, so this is what I'd like to do if folks are ready for this. So it's time for sticky notes. Hooray. And so what I'd like to propose, James, if this works for you, is that folks, why don't we do this? Why don't we move into our break, and over the break, I'm going to ask that you take your sticky notes, put them on to the boards. Again, I want you to write your name on a pink sticky note and take that pink sticky note with your name and put it in the group that you're most interested in working on. Then I want you to write your name on an orange sticky note and put it on the your second choice group. And so why don't we take a, no, it's not, it's not. Let's see what do we have scheduled here. I know that folks need to do a little bit of checkout. So we've got a 35-minute break schedule. So why don't folks do that and then be back at 10:30. And over the course of the break, we're going to take a look at what we have on there, and then we're going to make some decisions about that. Okay. So 10:30 back here. Pink is number one, orange is number two, Taryn, and put them up on the boards. Okay.
Devon, who's online? Okay. How are you doing? So we need to figure out how to incorporate you.
And I can't, you know, I can't see the board, but
You can't see the board?
but I'm looking at the working draft, and I gather there's 3 different groups. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. There are 3 groups.
Okay. And the number 1 is nutrient management.
Yes, sir.
2. Number 2 would be that second group, manure management.
Manure management systems, and then the third one is the permitting and implementation for NIPSIs. And you can look at it and let us know which one you think.
You know, so I'm to choose one and 2. First priority would be that the number 2, manure management.
Okay, that's your number 1 choice?
That's the number 1.
Okay.
And number 2 would be program implementation.
Okay. Okay, so your number 1 choice is, I'm gonna write your name on the thing. Your number 1 choice is number 2, manure management systems. And your number 2 choice is number 3, the NIPSIs program permitting and implicate.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'll make sure we'll take care of that, okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'll ask the folks find their seats. Okay, I said, folks, find their way back to their seats and we're gonna try to get started here. So I called home on the break and I just need a show of hands here because I learned something from my family that blew my mind. So I have a 15-year-old son. He just turned 15 and my wife took him driving for the first time ever. And he chose to drive with both feet, using his left foot on the brake pedal. And right. So and I was like shocked by this and my wife wasn't a shock. Do you know anyone that drives with 2 feet? Yes, who does? Well, not a manual, not a manual. It's an automatic. No, not a stick shift. It's an automatic. Do you know anyone that drives with 2 feet? No. Okay, I didn't either. This. Exactly. What's that? No, the high beams on the floor. Who has a car that has high beams on the floor? Oh, nice. Yeah.
What's on the floor?
The high beams, you know, the little button that you step on. Yeah.
No, that's old school.
Yeah.
That's old school for real. I haven't seen one of them in a while.
I know, right? 3 in a tree and a high beam on the floor. All right. Thank you all. Let's go ahead and get started. So here's how we're going to roll out the rest of the day. I think we're going to be able to end this a little bit early. As we looked at the first choices, either there was either some serendipity in the air or you all colluded because there is perfect symmetry. There's the right numbers and the right perspectives on the group. So everyone's going to get their first choice, which is great. And so Venus has some thoughts on how to organize going forward and what's going to happen next. And so Venus, if you wouldn't mind sharing with folks what you're thinking.
So first of all, thank you all so much for your expeditious sticky note placement. We really appreciate it. And as Rob mentioned, we are going to initially start off with everybody's first choice, everybody that's in the pink, with the caveat that we might have to make some tweaks potentially, depending on how the first couple meetings go, but we will do our best to make sure that you are maintaining in your group either your first choice or your second, just if we need to. And again, that would only be based off of kind of how things are going, the information that's being brought up, and making sure we have a diverse cross-cut and perspective. So I just wanted to just put that out there. Also, as you all are going to be kind of departing and thinking through, we would love for the people to go and huddle and maybe chat and talk a little bit about your next steps, what that looks like, cadence of meetings. You will definitely have EPA support for that. And the other piece, we will also have an NRCS SME that will be assigned to each one of those respective work groups to kind of talk through. So there'll be another kind of benching in the standpoint of what that looks like. And so Taryn can maybe talk a little bit about that if you'd like to. And then we will also have a SharePoint site as well. So there's some things kind of more fundamental that we'll be getting in place on the EPA side to make sure that you all have what you need. We'll be the ones that are sending out your calendar invites, some of those things. So stay tuned. We'll have like a lot of really good things ahead, but we're going to make sure that we're pretty organized. And so we'll have at least, you know, some touch points on kind of making sure that your first meeting set up, your second meeting that you all have what you need. If there's additional information, I know there was a couple points raised about making sure that we're talking about the problems. So if there are specific speakers that you'd like or specific angles that you'd like to be either brought to information, more questions, maybe potentially even other outside of agencies, private sector, that we have the ability to do that and facilitate those types of speakers in these respective ad hoc work groups. So Dr. Bridget.
Thanks. The only thing I'd have to add is that as we work through our work groups, we'll want to be able to communicate out the process that we're going through and the kinds of summary points that we have. So we'll have work groups that will summarize those, and then we'll make those available and make sure we distribute those out both at the SharePoint site and through an email sort of exchange. So we'll always want to make sure everybody's connected with the process as it unfolds. And it's not the be all end all too, that as you have suggestions or things you want to move on, please feel comfortable in reaching out to the leadership group, whether that is Rob in his role as facilitator, as me as the subcommittee chair, or with Venus, and we'll make sure that we can address those in a timely way.
And I will also just mention, if there's ad hoc work groups that find themselves looking for the same types of information, we might be able to do a combination also. So we'll have some flexibility as we get a little bit as we kind of go through this process together, as long as we don't trigger quorum. It is possible that if there is something that's like pretty, we've got some overlap here in some of our information and some of our topics. And so if there's some overlap or some needful things that both ad hoc work groups need, or our speaker that they want to hear from, we can also coordinate that accordingly and appropriately.
Darren?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a little bit about what Venus has said about NRCS or USDA's role, and just to put a finer point on a couple of those things, is that we see our role as representing USDA, so there could be USDA information or resources broader than NRCS. You've heard from about a lot of our practices and things and all of that. So I think what I would say to all the work groups is that please use us as a resource to get access to information that you need from USDA across all the agencies, not just NRCS. And that we probably will have a lesser role in this next stage of the group formation and development in terms of you guys having those conversations about what it is that you want to look at, the deeper dives, the questions, the concerns, that sort of piece. I think our influence will be a lot more as you decide what kinds of information and resources you need to answer questions or to get where the subgroups, the ad hoc groups, and then ultimately this subcommittee wants to go. So please see us as a resource. We want to be helpful. We have a lot of information that I think will be useful to some of the questions that you have. And it won't just be me. Obviously, it'll be Gene and Bill Reck, who are sitting back behind me here, but we'll also point you and get information from other resources. Thank you.
If folks have any questions, so what we'll do, see if folks have any questions, and then James and Venus, I'll come to you, see if you have any final thoughts, and then Venus, I will come to you to do the official closeout. So any questions? Yeah, Laura?
I'm just curious, I know this isn't specific to the subgroups, but with the subgroups, there's a lot of virtual meetings, and nothing personal against all of you, but we all clam up on these virtual meetings. And so I'm just curious if there's more space for more in person within the schedule. I see your face.
That's something we'll have to take back and look at. It's a lot to organize in-person meetings, cost notwithstanding. So it's something that we would need to kind of really think and look through. But if the interest of the subcommittee is to meet in person, we will definitely take that information back into consideration on how we potentially can do that. So noted.
Yeah, and one thought I hadn't articulated this to Venus or others, but when we do make the investment in the in-person meetings, we could try to piggyback ad hoc work group meetings alongside of it, so that we kind of lean into the investment we make to bring folks together. Laura?
I think it'd be really important because these work groups are never going to meet in person as a subgroup unless you do make that time within the schedule to do that. Which you've done a great job, and I know it's so hard, but there's a big gap between the next time we'll actually meet in person and all these subgroups are going to be meeting within. So it's good things happen better when people work together in person.
We'll definitely take that into consideration. I would say the one thing that we are also now, the timing, it's August, and it would be very challenging to have an in-person meeting between now and January. So I think we have to kind of factor that in. I will say that once you all get in smaller groups, and Dr. Pritchett can maybe attest to this, it's a lot easier. I mean, we'll be doing teams, you'll have cameras on. It looks and feels very different from a massive kind of meeting with 20 people, because you're now working in a much smaller group. And I would say we've had a lot of success in FRCC with our ad hoc work groups that have actually never met in person, I don't believe. We only actually meet during, and they're actually, and that committee is larger than this one. And we've had a lot of success with people coming, contributing meaningfully, a lot of great dialogue. So I will say we'll see how it goes, and we will fill in and adjust and adapt accordingly, kind of based off of the feedback from the ad hoc work groups.
Tom?
I had a process question. You said that there will be a USDA representative, EPA person that will sit on the ad hoc work group. And will there be a facilitator? I thought I understood early on that the facilitator would be involved.
So yes, we will have, so there'll be an assigned SME that represents the USDA. There'll obviously be US EPA people that will be on, and the facilitator will also be on. So there'll be a lot of, it'll be not just you all kind of by yourselves, but you know, there'll be some resources there, and we'll also set those meetings up.
Yeah, other questions? Yeah, Ken.
So my assumption is you're gonna send out the committee list to all of us too? That's what I thought, but I thought I should ask.
So we are going to send out the committee list. We've also taken pictures of that, so we'll share that information with you to make sure that the information that's captured on those respective groups, you all have it. Obviously, first and second choice. And so, yes, we will share that information with all of you. And then again, like I said, it'd be really helpful if you all try to, like the people that are here, at least huddle for at least an initial meeting when when you're available and you'd like to at least do a touch point, so we can help facilitate that and get something scheduled on the calendar and kind of go from there. But you all can decide your cadence, what days and times work best for the group. That's something that you all will kind of huddle internally. We're not going to try to drive that aspect of it.
Yeah, and maybe I can just ask a favor. Venus was trying to be very kind and diplomatic, but if you all could just meet your groups at the whiteboard there, and just look at your calendars and figure out if there's a week in the next several weeks that you're all in the office. You don't even need to give me a day, but I know it's August and there's vacations, because you just look at your calendars and write on that piece of paper what weeks might work in terms of your first and second meetings. That would be immensely helpful for the scheduling aspect of it. We'll do this the old-fashioned way. If you want, you can even use a sticky to put the date up there, but you don't have to. Orange sticky.
Orange stickies.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Venus. Other questions? Okay, any final reflections here before I turn it over to the chair and the DFO? Okay.
Y'all are too quiet. That must mean they're ready to go home. So thank you all so very much. I would say just huge thanks to the subcommittee members, to members of the public, to our FRCC members that have hung out with us the entire week. We really appreciate them. I also just acknowledge my regional ag advisors. Really appreciate you all hanging in. It's been a long week, but I think a very valuable one. So again, just really thankful for the folks that are online and the members of the public, as well as our stakeholders. So thank you. I think this I consider this meeting a huge success, and I think we've made a lot of fantastic progress. So we will be concluding our meeting, our second meeting, day 2 of the Animal Agriculture Water Quality Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Federal Advisory Committee of EPA. If there are members of the public that wish to make any comments or provide feedback based off of what you've seen, you can do so via email at aawq@epa.gov. Again, that's aawq@epa.gov. And we will accept comments until 11:59 p.m. on August the 24th, 2024. To be consistent with our Federal Advisory Committee rules. We'll have a summary of this meeting available on our website, which is www.epa.gov/FACA/FRRCC-0. Again, that is www.epa.gov/FACA/FRRCC-0. And you can access any information as it relates to our charge, the membership makeup, and we also post our meetings on that site as well. If there are members of the press that are attending today, either in public or virtually, and you have questions or need additional information, please feel free to reach out to us at press@epa.gov. Again, that is press, PRESS, @epa.gov, and we'll be happy to assist. Again, thank you all for a successful meeting, and we look forward to seeing you on the next time, and safe travels home. Dr. Pritchett?
Hey, nice work over the last few days. Very much appreciate how you've come from a place of curiosity. Can't wait to see what we're going to do together. So again, safe travels. Look forward to the next time.
Meeting adjourned. And thank you for our tech people, okay? Thanks, Will. You've been amazing. I appreciate you.